Hey, apologize for those technical difficulties a little bit earlier. Thanks for joining us once again. We made it to another weekend, and there's quite a bit going on in the crypto sphere. But before I get into any of that, I want to give huge shouts out to Donnie Glover, Donnie Glover Morning Show, Donnie Glover Show as well. You got to check out some of those past shows to see what Donnie's talking about. He's got some great new content, and looking forward to what's to come from him, as usual. Also, check out SistaBiz with Tamara and Nicole. They're always talking about great stuff in terms of what's going on business-wise in that local area of Baltimore. So also, be sure to check out the Black Business Roundtable with Art Blacksher. He's always got something great to talk about, and he's broadcasting here on the West Coast, live out of Oakland, every Thursday evening, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. So there's something I'm happy to announce with you guys, and that is my book, D5 for the Diaspora, is now available in hardcover. You can pick this up at my website, www.kamalarhubbard.com. Once again, there's been quite a bit going on in the crypto sphere. One of the stories that I thought was maybe one of the more important stories of this week is that minority communities are investing in crypto to escape financial discrimination. And if you want to learn more about that, you should pick up D5 for the Diaspora, because this is exactly what the book talks about. But a USA Today poll surveyed a number of Black, Hispanic, and members of the LGBTQIA plus communities to see their sentiments on cryptocurrencies. And of the highest responses came from the Black community. And what they see crypto as is a form of financial freedom, or really just overall general freedom, because many people in the Black community see traditional finance as not giving them a fair shake. So check that story out. I'm actually really interested in discussing this story a little bit more with my guests, who I'd like to bring in right now. And that is none other than Chris Bates. Hey, Chris, how you doing? Are you able to hear me okay?
Excellent. Thank you for having me on the show.
All right. Well, let me just give a quick intro in terms of who Chris is. Chris is a telecommunications and cybersecurity specialist. He received his bachelor's in psychology from Indiana University. He also has a master's in telecommunications with a focus on immersive mediated environments. During his first master's, he worked on creating digital algorithms that generated music with human interaction. He received another master's in cybersecurity from Colorado Technical University, and he is working on a doctorate in cybersecurity and information assurance from Colorado Technical, which she should be awarded next year. Currently, Chris is a research fellow at the Smart Contract Research Forum, which aims to bridge the gap between academia and professionals working in the blockchain and smart contract landscape. Chris, one of his main missions is to bridge the gap between technology and people in order to realize the economy of the future. Chris, welcome to Black USA Crypto News. I'm excited to speak with you today. And is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Oh no, thank you. I sincerely appreciate the forum and the warm welcome.
Well, you know what, Chris? Obviously, your degrees speak for themselves. You're well researched, well read, well spoken gentleman, and I just have to say you're one of the more informed people that I know in this industry as well. And so I'm happy to have you this evening.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, and I think part of that is all of those things you said are not wrong. And one of the things about being black is that you don't really get to be that person. America didn't, they didn't let me be this person. I broke through all of the walls to become this person. And I think that's where, you get the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musks, and those people are put in these places, and they have the narratives and they have the media, and that's what there's an expectation of what that person is supposed to look like, and I'm trying to make sure that young black kids don't have to look up to fictional black scientists and black specialists. Like, these people exist beyond Marvel movies. They just don't get shown, and that's kind of one of the things I'm working on now is making sure that a lot of the African academics that are out there and people just don't know about them because they're not getting the same kind of shine. That's like one of my main focuses right now. So
yeah, a common I guess or something that's reoccurring with this show is that how much more technologically looking for the right word. It seems like a lot of African scholars are fully embracing blockchain. They are, fully invested into the research and learning more so than, Black Americans here, which I try to highlight that so that we can begin or at least taking a page out of their playbook. Not that we're not already, but just not enough of us are. I think we see more people who are trying to accumulate cryptocurrency and be rich, which, that's fine. But I think it also makes sense for us to also be creators of this technology, inventors of this technology, and understand it better just beyond how much Bitcoin you have.
Oh, 100%. And in that light, there are many things about the technology that have the potential to create surplus of capital. But I think when people get into anything, it doesn't matter what it is. If you get into something to make money and not put the money you made back into the thing you extracted the profit from, that's a zero or negative sum game. And I think ultimately when people look at something and they're like, I see financial freedom, well, what kind of financial freedom do you mean? Because on the one hand, there is a financial freedom in getting into a decentralized money market, but on the other hand, this space has been defined for over 10 years. People rushing in aren't gonna. Some people may get lucky and get an outsized return on investment, but most of the time people are going to break even or lose. So if they're thinking like, oh, I'm going to get into Bitcoin and get financial freedom where I don't have to go to my job, that's not going to happen. And the way that it's being marketed is scary to me for a few reasons. So you can build a pyramid scheme around anything. It don't matter if it's a financial tool. It doesn't matter if it's a toy. It doesn't matter if it's it doesn't have to be digital. In the sense of like when people make fun of pet rocks, it's like, well, you can build hype and you can build a fad around anything. So don't make fun of the people who bought pet rocks because they just they fell into peer pressure that doesn't currently exist around buying. Well, not to say, because you have the geode and crystal market, it's the same thing. It's just fancier rocks. So we have this notion of like, let me say it this way. Americans don't understand value, but they rush to find and preserve value in a situation they don't even understand. I want to say, I don't know, I haven't seen any scientific studies. I want to say a large percentage of Americans still think that their dollar is connected to gold. And even people who were around during Nixon's shock, when the U.S. dollar was removed from gold, aren't aware that the U.S. dollar is a fiat currency that is backed by the economic health of the accumulated GDP, in that it's not really, there's no tangible, any specific basket of commodities or current or precious metals that the dollar is backed by. They'll say it's a petrodollar. That's not even really accurate, in the sense of our dollar's not backed by oil. If it was backed by oil, it'd be kind of better. Not to say that it should be backed by oil. That's another conversation. Yet I digress. What I'm getting at is you have people who are not willing to do the research to understand the historical trajectory of value from where even the notion of coinage came. Like, people have not studied coinage and the notion of what does a coin even mean. When you have a piece of metal that has been minted, there are certain things that represents, and I'll go quickly into this. One of the things that a coin represents is either some form of a nation or empire, in that usually it'll have a face on it, and usually it's the same face on a certain type of coin. This is not an accident. This is meant to create a semblance of a unified economy from the center of the empire or the capital to the edges. So wherever you can use the coin with the face of Augustus or the face of Alexander the Great, that's still part of the empire. So as soon as you get to a place where they don't accept your coins, you're not in the empire anymore. So this is kind of where, when we go to France or if I go to Europe, I have to exchange my currency because I'm not in the U.S. empire anymore. That's what that means at its core. So we're at a point where Americans don't even understand what currency means and what it does, in the sense of there are useful mechanisms in it. It concentrates the value system around an understandable, intangible, graduated schedule, in that eventually you'll be able to figure out how much a coin will get you in someone's labor. So ultimately, it's easier to use coins and dollars as a means of exchanging products and services than bartering. Bartering sounds good until you actually think about, how am I going to trade my skill for this gallon of gas? Somebody works at a gas station. How do I trade my labor for that gallon of gas? I just need to fill the tank in my car. It's really easy to use coinage and dollars and now credit cards or debit cards. So this is, again, when we're talking about what these currency forms represent, ultimately it represents a shared value system. And this is where it gets really sketchy, because then if you really understand math and you understand value, then you start to understand that the US dollar is not fungible within itself. And what I mean is, it appears to be fungible, but you take a dollar from Indiana and you go to New York and you can't get the same thing. That's the same country. We use the same dollar would use the same quarters. I realized this when I was a child because when I lived in Indianapolis, sodas were 50 cents. I remember when I went the first time I realized inflation existed, sodas in Atlanta were 75 cents. And in my little 5-year-old head, this clicked. I'm like, why is this same thing more expensive there? And this really bugged me as a 5-year-old. And I started trying to pick apart the currency from the time I was like in kindergarten, not just in the United States, in that I was fortunate enough to travel to France when I was in third grade for the first time. So I started to see the currency exchanges. This was before the franc had been gotten rid of and they transitioned to the euro completely. So I saw what happened when the franc was dissolving from hyperinflation, and then I saw the French economy transition to the euro because I went back a few times. So as an American, I'm seeing a currency evaporate and be replaced in a way that most Americans have never even fathomed. They just make fun of Zimbabwe. They don't fathom that this shit happened in France. The same thing that they make fun of Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwe dollar for hyperinflation, that shit happened in France. That happened in Germany. That happened in all these white countries that people want to hold in high esteem, but they don't have awareness, first off, and they have goldfish memories. So Zimbabwe's hyperinflation is the joke and not France for some reason. Yet I digress. What I'm saying is you have these people who then start to establish these hierarchies based on theft and information control, so that you keep Americans away from learning math, you keep Americans away from understanding currency, and then you can keep them chasing the next fad, and you have a bunch of people who are 10 years ahead and have stockpiled all of their cryptos, and they're going to just keep telling you what to go to the next one. This is the next one. You go, oh, now it's Dogecoin, now it's Shiba Coin, now it's Elon. So you have these people who, you can do this in any industry. This is not unique to finance. It's not unique to anything related to currency. This happens to everything. The problem is there is a potential decentralizing financial solution, and I'm afraid it's going to get wrapped up in all these pyramid scams.
You know, you said a lot there, and something I think is important, or at least hopefully I'm not compartmentalizing this too much, but you said people don't understand value. What I also kind of, to maybe go along with that, is, you know, I think people don't understand the distinction between value, price, and cost, right? When it comes to labor as well as goods. In America, especially, you know, that there's no other place where people don't understand that better than America, and that is unfortunate. You know, the other thing too is, you said you were saw that thing with Coke when you were a 5-year-old. You know, I didn't see that till I was a 35-year-old. So, you know, hats off to you for being 3 decades ahead of me.
Hey, I'm owning that I'm not a normal kid, and this is like, I was reading when I was 2.5, like on my own. Like I learned how to read on my own. There's all these things I've realized about myself that I'm owning, because other people have to learn to own these things too. It's not being cocky. It's not like, you know, I'm not thinking higher of myself. Yeah, guess what? I saw inflation as a 5-year-old and nobody had to explain it to me. I figured that shit out by myself and worked hard to deconstruct the colonial aspect of the way that inflation affects our lives and our ability to control our time. I've been working hard my entire life. I didn't fall into this on accident. So that's why I'm owning it. And that's, again, people are afraid to own their work because we have all been made to feel imposter syndrome, so we undersell ourselves. This is part of the system. Imposter syndrome, that's built into it. We've been gaslit into thinking, oh, you're not good enough. You're not that smart. Oh, you're not what you think you are. That's part of this. So then you take the lowest offer. That's part of this system. And I'm here to help people deconstruct that lifelong traumatizing gaslighting that all has been ingrained in all of us so that we undersell ourselves.
Yeah. Oh man, I know you touched on imposter syndrome a lot earlier in the show, and I mean, gosh, I just think about
My first degrees in psychology. Remember that.
right, right, and I mean, you know, I just think about black women in the workplace. That is like the example to me. It seems like the textbook example of imposter syndrome. Um, I, you could probably speak on a little bit of that, but uh, I think we're seeing so many examples of that in the news today, and even me as a black male, I cannot fully understand it to the extent any black woman can, for sure. But I think I have some idea in these news stories where people see it and they're like, "Wow, we never knew this was happening." So. That aside, happy to talk about that a little bit more. But that aside, what I do want to ask you about, you had a chance to talk about fiat currency. But what I want to know is, wait, am I doing this the right way? Is Bitcoin bullshit?
Thank you for posting that or discussing this book, because I like the way that book was written. It was meant to be a conversation with space and time as an open-minded skeptic, and that is exactly why I phrased the book as a question and not a statement, because I went in with that question. I did not have my mind made up, and there are points in the way it's constructed that's going to look like the conclusion was made, but that's because I have retroactive or retrospective analysis in the capacity to edit it. So there are things when, because I know how there are also because I have a degree in psychology, I know how people are. So I did things like put in TLDRs because I know people are gonna skip. They're gonna skip straight to the end. And I even wrote for that person, like there's like an address to the person that skips straight to the end, and it's like there are things like, because I also did those choose your own adventure books when I was a kid, I realized that people aren't gonna go through. It's not meant to necessarily be read chronologically, because I know that's not how people absorb information, but also you're gonna have to read it at least twice, if not 3 times, to actually get it. And that's not on accident either. I'm not trying to water down the material. It's very dense. It's short, but it's very dense. It's like antimatter in the sense of it's like a black hole as far as how dense. Like, I learned there is rhetorical flourish writing, and then there's academic writing. This book is academic writing with some rhetorical flourishes, in that there are no wasted words. There are times where I use rhetorical flourishes to make sure you stay awake, but most of the book is straight to the point, completely discussing exactly the concept and not wasting any words. And this is something that I think people like. When you read something that's academic, it's really dry on purpose, and there are some academic schools that do more flourished writing, but multiple schools I was trained in, it's very dry, very to the point. There are, like, if you can say it in 6 words, you say it in 6 and not 10. These are the things that inform the way I wrote this book. So it's not something like, you can't just sit down and read it. I promise you can't just sit down and read it, because you will not understand it. If you try to digest it all at once, it's too much information. Information overload is a real thing, which is why I understand now, as a martial arts practitioner, why sometimes they only teach you like 3 things in one session. You may be there for an hour, but you're only working on 3 moves because information overload is a real thing. And in that, this book is going to let you know that when you're asking is Bitcoin bullshit, you could be meaning 10 different things. And this is the element of when people ask that question, they don't even know what they're talking about. Are they talking about the financial element? Are they talking about the technology? Are they talking about the community? Are they talking about the decentralization? There are all these. Are they talking about the governance? Are they talking about how much control you have over the protocol? There are all these things that people could be talking about, but they don't know enough about the subject to then be asking that question. And then the way I put it is like, there's a reason people are asking that question, but they don't ask that question about how combustion engines work. They don't ask that question about how disc brakes work. Because the way that the media has hyped this thing, it makes it seem like, oh, you can make a bunch of money if you just learn how Bitcoin works and you just figure out these little numbers. You too can figure out the lottery like everybody else. That all these other people that we're going to highlight at the beginning and show they took out loans and sold their houses and put it in Bitcoin. We're going to talk about them at the beginning, but we're not going to talk about their losses. So we're going to make it seem like you can be these people at their high points all the time and never show you these people at their low points, because guess what? They all hit low points too. You never always win. That's not the way numbers work. That's just not the way statistics work. You can't always win. So when these people who trade make it seem like they're always winning, they're liars. You can't always win.
Right. That's
just not how it works.
Yeah, I think you're 100% on point with that. You know, no one is in crypto Twitter. Well, very few people in crypto Twitter are talking about, oh, I lost 50% of my bag today. You know, nobody's necessarily saying that. And actually, this goes back to a conversation way back, something I took away from one of our conversations that I thought was extremely valuable. And it's very much, you guys, everybody needs to stop what they're doing right now and understand this maxim of cryptocurrency communications out there. The people who talk about projects, the only reason why they talk about projects is because they are invested in those projects. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why we see this?
That's a great segue for me to talk about the research forum. So one of the things that we discussed early on was whether we were going to tokenize the research forum, and we decided, at least for now and probably for the near seeable future, that we're not going to tokenize it, because that inherently creates these conflicts of interest that then are going to make decisions affected by speculator sentiment instead of what actually needs to be the focus of the organization. So this is kind of where there are certain things that need to be tokenized or that could benefit from being tokenized, and then there are some things that shouldn't ever be tokenized. And I'm trying to do research to find where that line is and what that scale should be, in that I'm not I'll say this, I'm not 100% against anything. I'm not 100% for anything. And it's really, really difficult to do that when you have a portfolio. Because the problem is, when you have a portfolio, you want whatever's in your portfolio to win. And this becomes the inherent problem of people holding tokens, people getting invested in things, people then betting on a winner. And I think even in that context, the notion of a single winner is paradoxical in a decentralized space. You can't be decentralized if there's a single winner. And even if the network is decentralized itself, if there's a single winner, that's not true decentralization. So our notions of unilateral single winners of the and cornering of the market, that doesn't work in decentralization. That's completely incompatible with the very notion of what decentralization is meant to be. But that's inherently the problem of decentralization, is then you can't get a unified definition of what everybody thinks that decentralization is. So people may be talking about, the network, but then are they talking about the financial channels? Because if you get all of if let's say Bitcoin wins, quote unquote, and every transaction goes on Bitcoin in the entire world, that's not decentralized. I'm sorry, that's not decentralized on any planet. So if we're saying that's the subtitle of my book, actually, The Paradox of a Unilateral Decentralized Cryptocurrency. It's a paradox. That notion, which is why at the core, especially Americans, not so much the rest of the world, some post-colonial places have to reframe their mindsets into the notion of not having a single unilateral winner. That's not decentralized. That's not what this is meant to be.
Well, doesn't that really highlight the irony of Bitcoin maximalists?
Yes, all maximalists in the decentralized space are hypocritical phonies, basically. There's no other way to say it. I'm not gonna cut any corners with that. They're all phonies. If anybody's a maximalist of any kind in the decentralized space, they're a phony, and they're just in it to make money. And that's the worst kind of person to have in this community, in the sense of, like, they are mercenaries. They will sell themselves and the movement out for the highest bid. That is not the kind of person that affects change. And that's kind of where, I have no problem saying that and sticking by that. Maximalists are the worst. I can't stand maximalists, and they're not decentralized. Like, their type of thinking is completely in opposition of decentralization. If I can be direct.
No. That's why I like talking to you, and it's definitely why I wanted to have you on the show, because you have a different point of view than a lot of other people. You've been around for quite some time, and I think you've seen things come and go. And and obviously a lot of this is expressed in your book. But, you said that, and I definitely want to move to discussing the smart contract research forum, but I think it's also a really good opportunity to define what are smart contracts. And certainly you're one of the best people to define this for us. Can you tell our audience what a smart contract is?
And ultimately, this is still being debated, but at the core, a smart contract is meant to be a set of commands and scripts that effectively imply some sort of exchange of goods or caveats that have been met in order to exchange currency, or whether it's a NFT or some sort of token for a good or service. And ultimately, the problem becomes all smart contracts don't necessarily have exchanges of goods, and their automated processes don't necessarily have a buyer and a seller, or someone giving a service and someone receiving a service. And that becomes a problem because in contract law, the way I understand it, because I did a research summary on this, there are implicit contracts when there is a purchase, and when there is a buyer and a seller and a record of the transaction, there is an implicit contract whether they write it out or not. So when you go to the gas station and you use your debit card and you are expecting to get gasoline for X amount of dollars, if one of the sides, like if you get too much gasoline based on some sort of error and they recognize it based on the implied contract and the terms of service by which you use that pump, they may be able to seek damages depending on the terms that were printed on the receipt. And there are things like that where if the person then did not see the terms on the receipt, they may be able to claim that their understanding of the contract was different because they were informed after the transaction. And what ends up happening is, based on contract law, the lowest understood agreed upon terms are what gets legally bound as the contract if there is any conflict. So if there's any sort of conflict in what people on both sides of the agreement think are the terms, then all of the disagreements get thrown out, and those are not part of the unwritten contract, and only the things that are understood are part of it. And what that means is people can raise conflicts arbitrarily, and then it would have to be adjudicated. Now, the point of a smart contract is to be self-executing, quote unquote, and self-enforcing is what has been claimed. Self-enforcing is not possible. You can't enforce. And what I mean by that is, if you and I have a contract, you and I can't enforce the rules. We have to have a third party or the state as the one that's enforcing the contract to actually enforce the damages or ensuring that one or both parties is has their terms of the original contract met. That enforcement comes from agencies, it comes from government, it comes from lawyers, it comes from arbitrators. Smart contracts don't enforce. So the way that the smart contract has been pitched is not actually in line with the way that legal contracts exist or are written. So then what that means is, it's not that we're going to start calling smart contracts something else. It's just that there's going to be a lay interpretation of what smart contracts mean, and then there's going to be the actual interpretation. And the actual interpretation means that most smart contracts are not legal contracts, and they just represent a term that is identified as meaning self-executing code to mediate exchange of some sort. Or some, again, it's like not all smart contracts are for exchanges now, so that's where it's like some action results from a self-executing script or set of scripts being called on to then be for one user at a time, so that, again, it's like multiple users can engage with the smart contract at any given moment, because it's not be held to one node of access. And that's the benefit of a decentralized network. So in theory, millions of people could call upon the same smart contract without experiencing a bottleneck in the same way as trying to think, like if you're on eBay and you're trying to bid at the same time, eventually there's going to hit a limit where if too many people click, the slowest people are not going to count. So it's a matter of latency, and this happened with the stock market as well, in that the closer you get to the central node that's making a decision, the less latency is between the click and the network. And this is why the stock market people were setting up their trading offices as close as possible to the actual stock market servers, because the further you get, the more latency between your trades and the market. Not to get too far away, but again, this is where the notion of what makes something decentralized was put there for a couple of reasons, and people will often make it seem like it was only one reason. Like, yes, there was a financial decentralization aspect, but there's also the information flow decentralization aspect, so that if, like I said, Bitcoin didn't have smart contracts originally, but there was the notion of calling multiple people being able to execute transactions at the same time without congestion happening. And that's ultimately what decentralized networks are meant to do. But when they become too centralized, it stops having that benefit.
Something that you kind of touched on is, there's a lot of these technical terms that do not have legal definitions to them. So when you talked about smart contracts, yes, they are self-executing. No, they are not self-enforcing. And I see a lot of people who take liberty with some of these notions or some of these concepts, and they throw them out there without really understanding them. But to a certain extent, once again, there is no legal definition to some of these terms. So we don't have a centralized understanding of these.
So this is a misconception in that a lot of the way that it's been framed in the blockchain space is as if some of these mechanisms don't have legal counterparts, when in fact they do. So there's things like trespass to chattel that would represent reclaiming property in the same way that a callback on a smart contract would execute. And it's like, because people are not aware of those types of like legal terms, this is where it's only when somebody, I think his name is Joshua Fairfield, who's a lawyer, that put forth a framework for applying the concepts that do exist in law to their counterparts in the blockchain space. And this is one of the things that I did for the forum, in that because it's like a 90-page legal article where it's very, very dry. It's all, not all, but a lot of case law, talking about Uniform Commercial Code, Article 2, 204, the Battle of Forms. The Battle of Forms was what I was talking about earlier, actually. Then there are all these things about the way that these concepts have been framed by people in the blockchain space that haven't done their homework or were never legal specialists in the first place. And in that, the reason Joshua Fairfield's paper was 100 pages long is because he had so many concepts to deconstruct that had been presented by the blockchain space that he then would create counterparts or point at counterparts in the actual legal frameworks for. And I think the issue is you'd really have to be a specialist in sales law. You know, you can't, like, an average lawyer isn't going to know these things necessarily, where, you know, the law is so broad and expansive. Like, you as someone in law probably would have never had to know any of these things to operate, because it's so far outside the realm of what you do that these things don't apply. And this is kind of where I think there has been a lot of rhetoric about law from non-lawyers that has then shaped the development to where we get to a point where we're 10 years in, and because that mantra has been around so long, it's like Joshua Fairfield's body of work is revolutionary in that it deconstructs all of these things that people have been saying and points to examples where it's like, no, actually, this is X, this is Y, this is Z, and these things could all be actually applied in the cases in which the or not even decentralized, the maximalist space is saying that there aren't any solutions, because it's 100% the maximalist space that gets along these narratives and tries to frame these things as if they're not solved, so then they can bring a single solution.
Well, I agree. I think maybe where I was going with that statement was going back to someone you mentioned previously, like Musk, right? Who comes along and champions Doge or Bitcoin. Throws around some terms that, you know, resonate with people within the various communities, and all of a sudden they're a darling. I'm not trying to beat up on Musk necessarily, but
I mean, we should, because he's a charlatan. Like, straight up, that dude's a charlatan. He's dangerous. The notion of him being anything but a charlatan is dangerous. So let's beat up on Musk. Because I think people are afraid to, because then they're like, who is this guy? Like, yeah, guess what? I've written not AI, but machine learning programs that write music based on human input. That's a big deal. And this is where Elon would hire somebody like me and then take credit for my work and then be like, oh, yeah, we're doing this with the cars and then the robots we're building. Meanwhile, it's 100 of me's doing all the work, and he's out there taking all the credit, just like the way in the Spider-Man movie, it was a team of people that got pissed at Tony Stark. Yeah, it's the same thing. He's not a single genius guru bringing these ideas. There's 100+ people behind everything that Tesla or SpaceX does, and this dude comes out and takes credit. And then, I don't know if you heard about the steering wheel debacle. He's trying to design cars with no steering wheels, and then the engineering team has to say, oh yeah, we'll do it, and put the steering wheel anyway, because that was a dumb idea. And then nobody's calling him out on these stupid things. So that's what I'm like, yeah, this is a problem as to why you can't not beat up on Musk, because then when people aren't beating up on him, he goes out and, oh, follow Doge, follow this, that. And then when he entered at 44,000, anybody that followed him lost money because they probably didn't understand how to play the market. And then they probably didn't exit at the 60. And this is where there are things about the way he's telling people, oh, I'm buying a a micro house. Bullshit. He's not living in a micro house. I don't buy that. Elon Musk is not living in a 500 square foot home. Bullshit. But he's trying to tell people this, so then they go buy the 500-foot home for $30,000, something stupid. Because this is the problem with fabricating these tech geniuses that are really 100 of me's. I can't do that shit by myself either. That's why I work on a team. You know what I mean? Teams are what build things, not individuals. So this notion of this individual guru needs to be deconstructed. It's dangerous. It's super dangerous.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's why I bring it up. And, you know, it's to a certain extent, it's damaging to the industry, certainly damaging to the investors in the, or at least supporters, maybe not investors, to the tune that you just elaborated upon. So, you know, I feel like, you know, this is just my opinion. I'm certainly not trying to, you know, say that Musk is a criminal or, you know, he's violating the law or anything like that. But I do think there's some lack of judgment on his part, in my opinion, as well as some lack of judgment in people who are following him in. I mean, it's just like Jamie Dimon, just like Warren Buffett, you know, how they poo-poo Bitcoin loudly at first, but behind the scenes, quietly, they're finding ways to onboard.
So did you see the robot, though? I mean, the dancing robot, and I say that very loosely. That was actually just a dude in a costume.
Oh, no, I didn't.
So this is where, when you're like, he's not a criminal, like, yeah, he is. He's saying they're going to release a Tesla bot next year, which they're definitely not. As someone who's worked in machine learning, I can say 100% equivocally, they're definitely not going to be done with that in ever, probably, definitely not next year. And then the way that they presented it, as, like, it was meant to be a joke in real time, but the way the media presented it, they made it seem at first as if the person in the costume was a real robot, and the Tesla stock went up. So this dude just manipulated Tesla stock by bringing out a person in a robot costume saying we're building robots. Yeah, he's a criminal. I'm not afraid to say it. When we get to a certain point, when he did that what's it called? Funding secured at 420, that's very, very borderline criminal. SEC investigated. They're like, okay, not quite. This isn't quite criminal. But now, what he is doing with this robot claim and the way that the Tesla stock was affected, he is a criminal, because they are 100% not going to be able to do that. And the problem is, nobody in the SEC knows any different. They just have to take his word for it, because none of them understand how machine learning works. None of them understand how servos work or how engineering works, to be able to call him on his bullshit. And that's the problem with having those dumb people in positions of authority, whether on enforcement, because then you get Elizabeth Holmes claiming for 10 years that they've got this blood tester that can do things that science claims this should be impossible. Well, guess what? It was impossible, but nobody was able to call her on it for 10 years. So this woman's able to become a $1 billion unicorn company because she's white, and she's able to just carry confidence. She doesn't have that imposter syndrome. She didn't have that imposter syndrome that you and I were told to have. So this lady built a $1 billion company off lies and hot air and some fake numbers. And the U.S. government only caught it eventually because I don't even know how, like, I think they just got lucky. It wasn't, like, I think she just got too high on her own ego, and that's the only reason she got caught. Elon is the same person. People just haven't built enough things like I have to be able to see it and call him on it, because he's the emperor with no clothes right now. And only a few people can see that he's not wearing clothes, because the clothes he's telling people he's wearing are like, it's like the way that he's doing it, he's got the media telling everybody else too. So he's not just telling everybody, I've got these robes. The media's telling you he's got these robes. The stock market's telling you he's got these robes. Jim Cramer on MSNBC or whatever channel, he's bullshitting telling you he got these robes. So it's not just Elon. And that's the problem, is the emperor has no clothes. That's really relevant right now. But they didn't have media when that story was written in the same way that we do now. And then you realize, like, oh, I guess they had the lute player standing there acting like the emperor ain't naked, is going to make you think, I guess I'm not supposed to see it either. And right now, Elon is standing there butt ass naked in front of everybody, saying he's going to build this robot that's going to make... I'll give it to him. He's at least saying universal basic income is necessary, which it is. But the way that his charlatan existence has been hyped is very dangerous. And that's where I'm like, all I'm saying are facts. All these things I just said, they may be tinged with my opinion, but just go look them up. And even down to, yeah, he's being investigated right now for all of the deaths with Tesla that's not being talked about in American media. Go look at the British media. You don't see that in American media, because that would affect the Tesla prices. Where I'm like, how is Tesla stock going up when they're being investigated for auto drive related deaths right now? Because the media is just, again, Americans are not good at discerning what is a distraction, what is a smokescreen, and where the reality in things are. And that's where I'm like, I'm American myself, and I just got lucky in that I was taken back and forth. Like the way that they'll say there's the Great China Firewall, we got the same thing. It's just, I don't know, Uncle Sam's curtain, whatever you want to call it. We have a veil of information around the way we see things, and then we get these wannabe pharaohs like Elon and Bezos telling, like, the fact that we have these two people in a space race and the media is just like okay with it, that's a sign that we have cheerleaders who don't critically assess. There's no reason these two dudes should have replaced what nations were doing 40 years ago. The things they were doing 40 years ago caused a Cold War between us and Russia as nations. Now it's just these two egotistical dudes doing it, and Russia and NASA have to hitch rides with them. And the media's not saying it like that. Something's wrong, because the way I just said it is how all these people should have been talking about it. This is wrong. Everything that is happening right now is wrong. It's wrong in a way that our trajectory lacks creative thought. It is entropic in its nature. It is a dead end for our species. But the problem is they're selling that to us as a way for them to be the saviors, but they're the ones driving the dead end because they don't have any actual good ideas as to how to get out of it. But the media has told us there are saviors. But you go outside the American border, that's not how it is. So I say all that to not be a pessimist, in that our information filter is broken, and Americans have not learned how to get outside that filter to get better information. That's actually what my book's mainly about, in that our American system has been designed to take your time away from you and put it into a system in which you're going to be undervalued, undersold, you're going to be mentally stressed out, you're going to be traumatized, And guess what? You're going to like it because they're going to tell you there's no better way. What, you're going to go to communism? You're going to go to socialism? They're going to go over there to communist China? And they're going to constantly do those things to make you think you have to give 12, 14 hours of your day to this bullshit system so you can go home and see your kid. The kid that you had to put in daycare all day, that you had to go work to put in daycare. This system was designed to make you think that you have to go outside your home to find gainful employment so that you could eventually maybe see your kid for 5 minutes before you get to go to sleep for a couple hours and go do it again tomorrow and lose years off your life because you're stuck in this cycle without time to think about a way out. That's kind of what my book is about more than anything, in the sense of when people are talking about Bitcoin as a way to financial freedom, I think that's what they're actually talking about. They want to control their time. You don't need to be a billionaire to control your time, because guess what? Elon Musk don't control his time. When Elon Musk was on Joe Rogan smoking weed, his phone was blowing up. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're messing up our stocks. That dude does not control his time. He has $100 million worth or $100 billion worth of non-liquid assets, and his time is controlled by his shareholders. That dude is not financially free or free in his time. You don't have, and that's what I mean. The media is telling you is so that people constantly chase that and then don't step back and pull back their own desires so that they can actually spend time with their family and friends. When you don't want a new car every year, when you don't want a new house every whatever, you get more time with your friends, you get more time with your family, and you get way more money. And you're like, it's not that I have more money that I can do with. I don't need anything else. So my money just sits there in the sense of like, yeah, guess what? I'll go donate it to whatever. It's like, but the problem is people will be like, oh, this person doesn't have X, Y, and Z. They're not successful. Guess what? I got my time. I don't need your validation. I got time with my family. I got time with my partner. I got time to just sit and think. That's invaluable because I'm going to die one day. I can't buy that back. Once I'm about to die, there's no amount of fucking money that will be able to buy that time back. And that's what they're trying to lie and tell you. Oh, you get a Bitcoin, eventually that Bitcoin is going to be able to get you frozen. You'll never die. Fuck out of here. No. People need to realize time is the most valuable asset or anything that we have. It's the most valuable thing because you can't get that shit back. And the problem is people got everybody out here chasing Bitcoin to buy time. I'm saying skip, not to say, again, that's not what I'm saying in the book even, but if you are better able to understand fiat currency, better able to understand how to manage your capital, not get stuck in a hyperinflated US dollar that's on the same trajectory as that Zimbabwe dollar that they always like to make fun of here, guess what? It's doing the same shit. They just don't add the zeros. So the way that Americans are not aware, it allows them to get wrapped up in things that if they just don't get wrapped up in those things because they have a better grasp on them, then they can get more time back and live a better life. In the process, get better quality food, get more quality things. Like, it's not even about like living a modest life necessarily in this. Like, I'm a hermit, yes, to a degree. I'm a monk to a degree, but I don't live like modestly. And like, if I have an indulgence, I indulge myself, but I don't overindulge, and that's the difference. When you overindulge, that's when it's easy to lose control. There's a difference between like finding practical indulgence and keeping balance, because if then you overindulge, then you're out of balance too. So I think then one of the big problems is we've been presented overindulgence as if that's balance when it's not. Somebody in a mansion, if you have 4 people in your nuclear family and you have 18 bedrooms, that's not balance. That's overindulgence. If you have 2 people and you have 2 bedrooms, that's balance. And I think this is where there is this sense of like when you as a person or someone is attempting to find meaning, society, especially in America, is going to tell you money. At least with money, you'll be able to find all this stuff and buy this stuff, and then you go find the people that have it, and they're not happy at all. And especially now that we see these stars, guess what? They stink. They're walking around rich, stinking, and that's a sign of depression. They're not happy either, and that's what I mean. Like this. There's a whole lot to what, like, my first degree is in psychology, so I'm putting a whole lot behind people who are chasing free time and don't know why. That's why is Bitcoin bullshit is for a specific person who's like, they're trying to find a pathway out of this broken cycle because they know it's broken, but they can't put their finger on why. Guess what? I go back all the way 5,000 years to early China to explain how decentralization as a tool is not new, but as a tool, decentralization is something that's been around for a very long time. It's a scale. It ebbs and flows. And if people start to understand these things, then they'll start to be able to understand better the decentralization space. And by proxy, when somebody's lying to them as a maximalist saying, you should invest in this one currency in the decentralized space, guess what? That person's a liar. They just want to inflate the value of their own special interest at that point.
You know, you said a lot there, and something's telling me not to say what I'm about to say. But since I'm talking to you, you've been shooting really straight here. What I heard a lot of in what you said, going, from Musk to, how we live in America, what we believe in America, and going right back to crypto, something that just kept popping in my mind is cult and cultish behavior, and I see it being applied, right, to the cult of personality, the cult being groupthink. And so I don't know, I'm not trying to, once again, sum up what you're saying, but like,
well, I was gonna say, like, I come out on the first page and say that in the first chapter, so I'm not pulling any punches. Like, there is a cult of Bitcoin, but there's also a potential, and you got to be able to recognize the difference. You go to some of these conferences, and you'll see the cult members because they have a weird look in their eyes. They will not allow anything negative to be talked about Bitcoin in their presence. They'll snap on you if you say anything remotely negative. That's a cult member. And the problem with those people is they become synonymous with somebody who is then into just cryptocurrency or blockchain technology. So that's where it's to our benefit as people interested in the space to call out the cultists, so we can separate ourselves when other people are looking at the group and they're like, yeah, those are the cultists, but those are the people who are actually thinking rationally about these subjects. So we'll go talk to these people, and instead of just avoiding all of us because they can't tell the difference, as long as we're in the group saying, yeah, those people over there, those maxis, they're cult, that's a cult, then I think we'll be more likely. I mean, I know from I've worked with multiple governments, I've worked with multiple organizations because I've called out the cult for years, and I've not been afraid to call out the cult because I knew history would be on my side in that framing. And this is where, I mean, I didn't, I'm not the first person to see it, but in that, I wrote that book in 2017, which is where I wanted it to hold up for 1,000 years. I didn't care about making money on that book. When I wrote that book, the portfolio that I eventually lost gave me enough freedom to write that book. And this is where 2017, Everybody lost their shit. It wasn't me. I didn't make any moves. I woke up one day and everything was gone. That's what happened. And anybody who acts like they didn't see that is a fucking liar. I'm sorry, excuse my language, but that's the problem. When you like see that money and it comes so quickly and then it goes so quickly, you learn a lesson about how quickly that type of money comes and goes. Everybody seeing it and not experiencing it, they think that it's not like, they think they can be the person to like overcome that flash. And they're like, oh no, I'd be the person. No, I promise. When you have seen a tremendous explosion in your account, the thoughts that come into your head, you can't even fathom them until it happens. And then it tricks you, and then it's gone because you don't act. It freezes you. It's like an information overload. When you see zeros that weren't there before the night before, you're like, oh shit. And you don't even, it's like one of these things where people think that they will be the unique person to overcome that information overload. But guess what? Our brains just aren't wired for it. It's something that our brains are not wired for. So when it happens, you eventually just lose it. Like you make that money as quick as you made it, it's gone because you didn't do anything to make it. It was just a flash in the market that you had nothing to do with, that you got lucky to be part of. And when you are part of it, you realize I didn't do anything except, like, it's like you put your chips on 7 and 7 hit. If you think of it as anything different, you're delusional. And the people that can try to convince you, oh, I know the market and I knew what this is. Nope, you're lying. Those people got lucky. I know how to trade. The thing with, and what even people don't even usually discuss the word correctly, it's arbitrage. You can arbitrage anything. You can arbitrage, I arbitrage comic books. Like this #1 issue of Black Lightning, I'll probably arbitrage that. It's like the notion of buying something and then selling it for a profit is not unique, is not new, and as long as you don't sell at a loss, you make a profit. The issue is timing. And when you're dealing with a market, you can't control the timing. So effectively, it's windsurfing is how I see it. It's not anything more than windsurfing. And the people who act like it's some sort of magic formula, they're just lying. They're just liars. You can get better and have a better percentage to the point where the trades you make are most of the time making your portfolio grow. But as I said earlier, nobody makes 100% profitable trades. That's impossible, first off. And then the issue is the amount of the trade is going to affect like the size of portfolio. So it's like, this is why people tend to generally stay in less than 30% of their portfolio when they trade, because yeah, you can bet on black, but if it's red, then everything's gone. This gets to another type of savings account that I've just become aware of. It's like a prize link savings account, which we don't get a lot of in America because our system sucks, first off. But most of the financial mechanisms are established to extract from us, and they're not really built in a way to make it easier to accumulate for someone who's not at the top. And this prize link savings mechanism has been around at least since the 17th century in England. And the reason I learned about it is for SCURF, again, when I'm doing, as a research fellow, I'm fortunate enough to be like paid to apply what I know to other people's research. And that's a goal I set when I was in kindergarten. We had a think tank in my neighborhood for some random reason, and I got it in my head. I'm like, a think tank? You mean these people like work they get paid to think? And I got it in my head when I was very young. I'm like, that's the coolest job ever. If somebody's like paying you to think, there is no job cool in that. I don't care how much they pay. It's just the fact that you're getting paid to think. I didn't care if they were millionaires or not. Like, the notion of these people just thinking as their job, I was like obsessed with that as a kid. So now that I'm doing it, this is like the most rewarding thing, because then I get to find things like PrizeLink savings account, where the premise behind it is if you put your money into a PrizeLink savings account, there's no loss potential, but there is the potential that you might be selected for a reward. So in a lot of these accounts, they have annual percentage yields on top of the rewards. So it's like you may be getting a 5% APY, and then they do a monthly reward of like $10,000, something like that, where or the daily reward may be like $200, but they're 30 times, or they're daily, so you have a higher chance of winning one in the daily pool rather than the monthly pool. But the monthly pool, you get a bigger reward. So there's all these things about PrizeLink savings account I'm just learning about as an American, where I'm like, why haven't I known about this my entire life? There's a reason that our banks don't do this in general, but the fact that I don't know about it as a fairly informed person is pretty insane, and that I'm learning about it this late. I'm excited to be able to share information like that with other people, but I'm also aggravated when I learn things like this, where I'm like, oh, they're intentionally making it harder for people to accumulate wealth. And in the process, for like black people or women, they're not paying us, and they're stealing our labor and doing it in our faces and making it seem like they can't change the laws to do anything about it, as if like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to earn 80% as a white male doing the same thing as me, and then a woman's supposed to do earn 70% as a white male doing the same thing as her, and they can't do anything about it? Really? Bitcoin's not going to save that. And this is where that problem is something that we have been gaslit into thinking that we can't solve. So we keep doing this other abortion and guns, and we get obsessed. Gay rights, like the same things that people were arguing about when I was a kid, they're arguing about now, and none of it's been solved. I mean, gay people have better rights than they did when I was a kid. That's definitely there. Like, not to say that those people, not to diminish the gay rights movement and what they've done. So that's where I want to, like, in that, insert the caveat, like, not to say that they haven't brought us out of the cesspit that was the homophobic, anti-gay United States before, because that was a really horrible place. It's slightly better now. So we have made some progress, but we're still not paying people equally. Native American population is just at 9 million, which is great because it's doubled. I saw the Native American population in America has gone from 4 million in 2010 to 9 million in 2021, and white people are scared because they didn't want that to happen, because then you see these stories about it where you're like, I bet a lot of people didn't even realize what the Native American population was. I didn't know. So it's not to say that, like, you're not, how are you, I'm not a specialist, why would I know? But I'm not trying to go on too many tangents. What I'm getting at is there is a system of what you see and things that you don't see. Native Americans are behind the buckskin curtain, is what it's called, and they are invisible people. We have a caste system in America. Some people are in the invisibles. We'll point at India and be like, oh, they do arranged marriages and have a caste system. Yeah, we do that shit here too. We just don't acknowledge it. We have invisibles and untouchables here. They're just invisible and untouchable. And you have to actually make an effort to connect with the invisibles and untouchables. So what I'm getting at is this financial freedom that those people specifically are being promised, it doesn't play out the way they're being promised, but it could happen if they learn how to control their time. And ultimately, this gets back into, gotta understand value and the system in which you exist to be able to effectively get to that point of change. And I think that's where we're like, a lot of people want to, but they don't have the luxury or time to do the things and learn the things that I've been able to have the time and luxury to learn. So that's where I like try to condense it into this little neutron star of information. And that's where I know I've been super lucky. I'm not gonna, I've read Siddhartha. I feel like I'm Siddhartha in many ways. Everybody's Siddhartha at one point in his life. It's just acknowledging where you are in that path. Like, we're all in this river. The problem is you got people who don't want to like get on the same raft, and that's fine. You don't have to be on the same raft as me, but I know I'm not in this alone. And that's because I don't choose to walk this path alone in any venue. And that's kind of where individualism that makes it seem like, oh, your $100 billion bank account is what sets you apart. Well, that's fine, but I have a sense of community and a sense of belonging that he can't buy. He can't buy that. I've worked very hard for something that nobody can buy. And I feel like it's like there's a moment. I remember a psychology teacher told me when he self-actualized, I feel like in the sense of me saying that I don't need that I'm self-actualizing, in that I don't need $100 billion or recognition from the system to feel like I've become a success. And in that, it makes me even more defined in myself, because this system, I'm not defining myself in opposition to it, but this system has defined a path that I'm not walking, and nobody's walked this path before, as far as I know. I mean, I'm sure in the grand scheme of the infinite, nothing's original, but what I mean is I'm not following anybody. And when you do that in this specific society, it makes you even more yourself. But you have to, no man is an island, no person is an island, no woman, no they, no one. And the notion that we are is a lie that is meant to steal our time.
Yeah, there's clearly a lot there. And I think, you talked about a lot of things. You talked about distraction. You talked about imposter syndrome. I think, when it comes to the Black community, that those are major themes, right? We're distracted by what we see in the media. We're distracted by what we are thought or told to think of as what is successful. And then we also have a layer of survival mentality that is really highlighted through the racial wealth gap as well. But then again, it goes back to what you said, is money really the most important thing? We've done without for so long. I mean, that's our history in the United States, is the deprivation of resources and what we've been able to make and create through that deprivation, and still in many ways come out on top. But we're still on bottom when we're measured through these metrics.
Are we? And this is where, again, it's like those metrics is the key word. And what you've just nailed upon is, yeah, guess what? We created entire genres of music. We created entire genres of dance. The drum set didn't exist before poor black people constructed that out of the lack of the capacity to have a full band at the same time. So there's all these things that, yeah, we did that creativity out of the lack of having the capacity to just buy it. And guess what? When bling bling came in, it started to die. So I don't think those things are coincidental. And the more I get older, the fewer things I do for profit motive, and I feel more and more successful as a human being the more things I do for myself or for someone without the notion of money having to be involved. Not to say, you have to have a roof over your head and you have to get a certain level of stability to be able to get there. So that's where, that is a statement from a point of privilege and a point of luxury. Not to say that it's not, but I worked hard to get there, and I also understand that the reason I got there is because I stopped chasing more. This place of peace doesn't happen overnight, but it also doesn't happen when you want more for no reason. That whole, well, I needed a Lamborghini. Well, why? Okay, my car is fast enough. My car is cool enough. I don't need a Tuatara. I don't need a Pagani. Those cars are cool, awesome. A McLaren F1, all right. You know what? I just don't need it. I don't actually need it when I wanted a fast car. I got a fast car. It's 20 years old. It's not new. It's fast. That's what I wanted. I wanted something that looks cool. That's all I cared about. The fact that it's 2021, 2022, 2024, I don't care. And people get wrapped up in that, and they don't even know why. And they'll end up wasting their lives on things like that when it's really easy to just let a lot of that stuff go. And you find peace where, again, it's you're not... I guess where I'm trying to come from is the notion of what do people need to be happy. It's well, you can only occupy one bed at a time when you're sleeping. So how many bedrooms do you actually need? How many homes do you need? You can only sleep in one home at a time. Yeah, it'd be cool to have 2 residences, but is the overhead worth knowing that you have 2 homes when you can only occupy one at a time? So there's these things about, well, I could rent it out. Well, okay, but what is that extra income are you going to use it for then? Are you going to actually make your life more enjoyable, or are you just going to get more money? And these are the things where, again, it's the abstract notion of value has people chasing things they don't even know what they're chasing, whether it's time or more material goods. And that's where I'm figure out what you want. That is the best place to start, because then people will realize well, okay, I do want a house, okay, I do want this car, but that's it. And then you're okay, well, that's not actually that expensive. And then you realize you don't need $100 billion to get to those things. But if MTV Cribs or People Magazine or CNN is deciding what the trendy thing for people to acquire is, and people get wrapped up in that, then it's really easy to spend millions of dollars over a course of a life on things you don't even want. And I think it's been really, I'm fortunate in that my mom and dad were very supportive of my comic book, I'll say, infatuation as a child. So and this is an important story. I will never forget pulling out X-Men issue 282 from the mailbox. I saw Bishop on the cover. a black man with all these sparkles, powerful black man, 7 feet tall, coming out of the future. There's nothing like that. I cannot tell you, for a kid to see like a black man coming out of the future, like that was a life-changing experience. And like I'm like emotional over it for a good reason, in that when I see kids being able to like look at Black Panther and like Black Lightning and shit like that, where I'm like, I didn't have that as a kid. I had to work. I had to buy a bunch of fucking comic books because they only responded to the numbers. I had to buy so many comic books, so kids could have Black Panther on screen. And that's why I'm like, it's like crazy. It's crazy, man. Like I feel, I don't feel stupid crying about it, but it's like, because I know what that moment as a 9-year-old kid or whatever, however old I was, when I pulled that comic out of the mailbox, I saw it. That changed my life. You don't know what it's like to see yourself represented until you see it, because you're robbed from that. I was robbed from Sunjata. I was robbed from Mansa Musa. I was not told about the black heroes of Africa, the great black kings, the great black queens. Malika, I was not told about these people. These heroes were stolen from me. So when I got Bishop, that was a life-changing experience. And eventually I found Sunjata. I found Sunjata again. Sunjata is in my DNA. Sunjata is in my DNA. I eventually found Sunjata again because these people disconnected me from my history, and I had to search long and hard to know who Sunjata even is. To be like, oh, that's when people are like, oh, I'm royalty. What does that even mean? Oh, it's not about piles of money. It's about how many people revere you, how many people love you. That's royalty. That's what true royalty is, and we've been disconnected from that royalty. Straight up.
You know, that kind of sounds like that critical race theory stuff.
Yeah, the buzzwords.
Sorry, I mean,
Which,
I always go ahead.
I mean, it's like you have to. I don't personally believe in race, honestly. Race is a construct that is not reflected by science. So I say all that to say I don't like race is a construct. It's not real. It's not real. It's not. Tribes are real. There's more in the sense of like I have more genetic there's more genetic lineage that would align with the tribal affiliation across demographics than actual racial consistent. And that's where I'm like, that's why the Ashkenazi Jewish people are a thing, because tribal genetic ties are stronger than actual racial ties, because once you try to define racial ties, there's too many things that will classify, so the classification breaks down. So thus, it's not a real classification. And that's where the actual tribal ties are more, there's like a reason. So like I've been so many places in Africa and seen so many different tribes. Like you go to Uganda, the people's hair breaks really easy because of the climate. I'm clearly not, like, that's not where I'm from. You know what I mean? But I had like the longest hair in the entire country when I was there. Like not even close. I had the longest hair in Uganda when I was there. Nobody's hair was even remotely close to the length of my hair. Man, woman, child, elder, nobody, because their hair breaks really easy because of the climate. And you see things as you travel around the continent like this where you're like, oh, black is not a thing. Black is an identity that we've been had thrust upon us where our tribal affiliations were there before and are more valid as a construct than the actual notion. Not to, again, black, I'm black, but what I'm saying is I'm Igbo. My Igbo is that usurps my black. And in the sense of like, you do the genetic, the thing is, I have not had my specific DNA done, but I've been around enough places. I've seen enough different tribes. I know I'm Igbo. You know how? Because people started coming up to me trying to talk to me in native tongue and didn't know I wasn't from there. When that happens, then you're home. When people just come, hey, you know, blah, 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 blah. Hey, man, no, you're from here. You just didn't know it. And that's the benefit of being able to have traveled around and see these places where I'm like, I guess I'm part Turkish. I haven't done my DNA. But again, it's like the way people embrace you, I know I'm part Turkish. There's no question in my mind. I have no question in my mind. Because when I'm there, the way people embrace me and the way I feel, it feels like my DNA has been there before. Not to say that it's Turkish, but something in my past has been on those lands, and I have no problem. And what I mean in my DNA, not to say that, like, I specifically, like, when you have genetic memory, those things are passed down. It's like the fear of snakes or the fear of spiders or whatever, or the attraction to spiders because your great-great-grandfather was a spider handler and his grandfather before him. So then you're handling spiders when you're 4 years old. That's genetic memory, and people don't believe it until they experience it. It's not magic. It's not mystical. That's the reason Steve Irwin's kids out doing alligator shit, because it's genetic memory. I mean, and they obviously socialized the kid, but there's, again, Steve Irwin's great-great-granddaddy was probably out in somewhere, and then he turned it into a TV show. But these are the things, like, you know, you have to have a lot of self-awareness. Like, I went to a Lakota reservation and did some sweat lodges with them to get in touch with the native culture, because that's what I'm like, if you don't actively try to get in touch with these things, there's no contact. So in doing those things, I'm like, I know I have like Blackfoot heritage, and it's not the same tribe, and I'm not trying to conflate those at all, but it's more so like I don't have access to Blackfoot because it's not, you don't have access to everything. And that's where when you have access to something, you have to take the opportunity and use it. And this is where a lot of people will take things for granted, and then you find out, like for example, if you live in Istanbul, you have all these 100, maybe sometimes 1,000-year-old monuments, and then you find out the people that live around them never go to them because they've grown up with them, and they just take them for granted. And like, oh yeah, that cistern, whatever, is right there. It's a 1,000-year-old cistern, and you're like, you've never been interested, but it's because they grew up with it, and then they take it for granted. So there's all these things like running water that we grew up with that apparently rich people in America started taking for granted and stopped washing their kids, stopped washing themselves. Like, you know, I can't imagine people who didn't have running water being like, yeah, I'm not going to wash my kid today. Like, it's not something that people who don't have running water have the luxury to not do. And then we take these opportunities as Americans to take things for granted and stop doing them, because that's a sign of luxury. It's like, oh, you have a pool and don't use it? Oh, you must be successful. That's the way American mindset is. And it's really vapid, but also if people aren't aware of that culture, then they end up having a shitty life experience when they could have had an awesome life experience. You could have used that pool instead of sitting out by it trying to look like you're rich and not using it. And that's like, you know, you have PlayStation 5, for example. They made only enough PlayStation 5 machines so not even 1% of the population could get them, right? Everybody wants a PS5. What games have you heard of for PS5? Guess what? There's none right now. So anybody who has a PS5, it's just sitting there not being played for the most part because there's no games for PS5 right now. Because there's I'll say this, there's a gap between the development for the past generation systems and the new generation systems. And everybody's still working on the past generation systems to get the last out of that, and they haven't turned their attention towards the new generation. So there's not a whole lot of games. But I want a PS5. And everybody stopped talking about the Xbox because there's plenty of Xboxes. So nobody wants the Xbox, even though there's actually more games for it. So it's this culture of, I want the thing that nobody has so it can sit there and show everybody that I have it, to show that I'm rich. That's exactly, and my thing is, as a gamer, I can say that because I don't have an Xbox, I don't have a PlayStation, I have a PC, so I see the game releases, and I see that there's no games on PS5 right now. There's like very few actual games for the console. So people rushing out to buy one, what are you doing it for? Because there's nothing to play. So it's one of these things where, like, I'm not shaming people who rushed out and bought a PS5 for their kid. But the people who went out and bought a PS5 who don't even play games and then just bought it, especially the ones that bought it off eBay at a jacked up price just to have it, just as a sign, they're the reason you can't find them, because they just want it as a status symbol. A PS5 became a status symbol, and as soon as that thing was like $1,000, $1,500, oh, I got a PS5. Well, people knew you probably paid $1,500, $2,000. Oh, this person's balling. They got a PS5 they don't even use, and they know that, so that it's meant to virtue signal and value signal when there's no games. So that's where I'm like, I'm looking at the system in which people are being hyped to buy things and seeing that the logic is not there and there's no actual sound reasoning behind the purchase of these things.
So I also think that brings us kind of full circle back to crypto and why Bitcoin is bullshit, right? You know, a lot of what you just said there speaks to a lot of cryptocurrencies out there. And just like that PS5, having the technological capability to do so much, as do cryptocurrencies and blockchain tech, or well, we'll just say cryptocurrencies. We have so much crap out there that is really wasting our time, or people are looking to acquire for status. And I think that's, you know, once again, one of the reasons why I enjoyed reading your book, why I need to reread your book. This really is a journey in rethinking, once again, what money is, what time is, and what value is. And then also consider the cost.
I'll use my brother-in-law as an example because I was having a conversation with him, and he was like just getting into, I think he got into Dogecoin or something, and then he read my book, and he's like, I'm just trying to stack a Bitcoin so I can, make sure I can protect your sister financially and all that. And I'm like, why? And I don't think he expected me to ask him that. And he's like, what do you mean why? I'm like, why do you want a Bitcoin? And he's like, well, it'll, you know, in the future, it may be like X amount of dollar, you know, it could be, and I'm like, but you don't have to have a Bitcoin to do that. So that thing so that's why I'm like, people need to know their why. If somebody's doing something and they don't know their why, they'll just do it forever and eventually just spin out and lose all their money, because they have no exit strategy or plan or exit in sight. And then they only end up exiting because they're forced to, because they bust ultimately. And that's where you hear a lot of people's exits in that sad, oh, I lost all my money. It's like, well, you were only in it for money in the first place. So later, see ya. Goodbye, good riddance. Because I'll say it like this. Have you ever bought U.S. dollars? Come on.
No, I've
You
not.
never bought U.S. dollars?
I guess
Yeah.
maybe I bought it when I sold Bitcoin.
So the only time you're buying U.S. dollars is to actually use them. If somebody's buying something not planning on using it, what's actually happening? And then if the notion is like, oh, I'll buy it to sell it to somebody else so I can get more money, which is what most people are then doing. You don't have to do that with Bitcoin. You can do that with comic books. You do that with action figures, you know, whatever. You don't have to do that with Bitcoin, but I think the problem becomes people see flocking and they see a bunch of people rushing to something, and then they see what looks like an easy opportunity to be one of those people that makes money. Anytime somebody makes money that's actually not going to just vanish out of their account, it takes work. And I'll say it this way. My computers, as we speak, the multiple computers in this apartment and the one I'm using are mining. It's not a lottery. It's not luck. It's not passive income. My computers have part-time jobs. Period. I don't want to hear anybody frame it any other way because it's wrong. There's no such thing as passive income. Passive income means somebody else is working and you just pass the ball. That's all that means. My computers have part-time jobs. My computers are going to make more money than some humans this year, which is messed up. That's messed up. But my computers, because they are constantly working, they are not passively making me income. They are working to make me income. And the thing is, if they didn't solve the problems, I wouldn't get any money. So if my computer's just running these equations and they don't actually solve the problems, guess what? That's not income because I'm just burning energy and not solving any equations. So there is an element of the way these things have been framed is wrong. It's not passive income. The computers are not just doing a lottery. It's not just a prize. They are doing, in most cases, elliptic curve cryptography to secure the network so that transactions that are not meant to be seen are not seen, or the information that is not meant to be accessed by unprivileged parties is not accessed, in the same way that when you go into your bank account and log in and use your password, there is an entirely separate system securing the activity besides the one that manages the numbers. And those two things have been combined in a sense in the Bitcoin network, but they're still separated at points in that the people doing the mining are the ones that are providing the back-end support to secure the network, while the people who operate the validating nodes are providing the software support that then provides the user interface provider applications the information they need to give someone access to their wallet. So you can go access your wallet through source or the command line, but most people right now use graphic user interfaces, and those things are applications in themselves. And many people are like using a GUI wallet, thinking that they're directly accessing Bitcoin because they don't understand applications. I'm just going to download an app. I got an app. And they don't know what app. They just learned app as a buzzword, unfortunately, because of Apple. And then nobody even understands what an app is. They don't know that an app in most cases is just a website that's been wrapped to make it appear, or not appear, but it's a package that you can download that has a bunch of links and directions to the proper places and keeps you confined within that so the app doesn't take you outside of that space. It's basically a sandbox website that only keeps you confined. But nobody really knows that because they didn't bother to learn web design, and now they're busy trying to learn how Bitcoin works because they missed the internet buzz, they missed the internet race, and couldn't make money on AOL. They didn't make money on Yahoo, so they didn't bother to learn anything about it. They didn't bother to learn how the internet works, but now they want to learn Bitcoin. So then it's people like me who are in a position, because I've done a lot of research, to be like, okay, there are things that need to be understood if you actually want to understand these things, but you don't necessarily need to understand these things. So it's just a matter of people then trying to determine where they are trying to get themselves within the space, because a lot of people just lie. I'm just trying to find out some stuff. No, you want to make money. Just be honest. Just say you want to make money, because the sooner you're honest with yourself and other people, the quicker you're going to make money. Because if that's the goal, that's super easy. Arbitrage, do it. Just learn not to sell when the market's down, because that's all it is. You just have to learn how to control your emotions. That's it, period. You can do it with toys. You can do it with comic books. Like I said, you can do it with video games, as long as it's valuable, because nobody's going to buy anything that's valueless. Yet I digress. This is where you get a bunch of shit coins and people sitting on bags because they bought something that they were hyped on, and then they got to go hype somebody else on it to just offload their bag of their shit coin that they got sold. So this is where Tesla's a shit coin. Apple's a shit coin. Google's a shit coin. Facebook's a shit coin. That term does not even necessarily just apply to tokens anymore. What I mean is, the ground of investment is not public. It's private. If you don't know about something and you're hearing about it, you're not the ground floor investor. And people are getting their return on investment on you hearing about it. That's how investments worked for a long time. That didn't start with Bitcoin. It didn't start with crypto. But people just didn't know about it because they didn't have time to learn about the stock market. They just had all these dudes going in suits, man. They're managing their portfolios, making it seem like there was some really hard science, because they make it seem like, yeah, you can do logistic regression and you can do statistical analysis and make some fairly good predictions, but nobody's 100%, because we would know that person's name. If anybody was 100%, we would know them. Nobody's 100%. And in that, then we can say that even if somebody's like 90%, well, you're still not 100%. That 10% could be when you bet the farm and then you lost it all. So this is, again, where there's no, there's a fictional Wolf of Wall Street, and that person's based on a real person who was inside trading, but they weren't organically winning. They were insider trading. So when we find out, okay, there's boilerplate or boiler room, there's Wolf of Wall Street, what's it called?
Big Short.
Big Short. There's all these movies about these fictional Wall Street guys that just know everything and they never lose. That's why it's fiction, because that person doesn't exist. If they did, we know about them. And again, the Wolf of Wall Street, the only reason we know about him is because he's a criminal and made a deal. So that dude, yeah, if you want to be a criminal, you can stack the cards, but you'll eventually get caught, and maybe you can make a deal and not be in prison for life. And then maybe, I guess you could call that a win, but eventually Martha Stewart, Elizabeth Holmes, eventually Elon Musk, all this stuff is lies. All this stuff is lies. The thing is, riddle me this. How do you increase your stock price by 1,000% without increasing your production by 1,000%? It doesn't. Math doesn't work.
Yeah,
The math doesn't work.
That's not something I can answer.
I mean, I was being facetious. The math doesn't work. It's not real. If you increased your profit margin by 1,000% without increasing your production, and by proxy, the management of your supply chain by the same proportion, the actual gains are not real, and it's speculative gains which aren't real. And that's what I mean. Like, nobody's gonna say it like that because they're so invested in telling you that the stock market, that's the real one. Cryptos, we don't know about that. Crypto's the Wild West, but the stock market, that's the real one. Well, how did Elizabeth Holmes get through then? How did Elizabeth Holmes get $1 billion company if that's the so-called real one? Oh, you mean they don't know what they're doing either, and they're just wearing suits and making it look like? Oh, okay, yeah, okay. Frauds get through over there too. They can perpetuate frauds. Have you heard of Power Entertainment? Come on. So, Power Entertainment, this is a big deal, and especially in light of the conservatorships. Power Entertainment was a company that used Stan Lee's image towards the end of his life and sold a bunch of stock. They made a couple of properties, but they sold a lot of stock using Stan Lee's image and this false narrative of their plans, which Stan did not agree to. He had never agreed to. And in fact, it was like a complete fraud. So this thing went on for years. And because the people involved had reputations that were good enough that nobody thought that it was an actual fraud, that they got away with it for like, I want to say 5 or 6 years. And then eventually they got found out, and luckily it was before Stan died, so they were able to resolve the issues with, and the only reason I even know about it is because I own stock, and they ended up refunding my stock. Like, I got my stock refunded to me because of the legal problems associated with this company, which I didn't even know was a thing, which I guess would then be associated with these like notions of the idea that crypto or the law doesn't have solutions to these problems that crypto is saying are problems. Like, yeah, guess what? I invested in a company. The company was a fraud, and I got my money back in America. That's a pretty big deal. But crypto people act like that would never even be possible in America when I've experienced it. And like I said, the only reason I even know about that is because I happen to own stock in that company and had it got returned, that's like the craziest letter to be receiving, where they're like, yeah, we're liquidating this company's stock and returning the funds to any shareholders because of X, Y, and Z. And you're like, wait, what? I thought this was a legitimate company because I bought it on the stock market. Nope. Frauds get through there too.
Yeah, that's where I actually started and actually came across Bitcoin, was studying stock and securities fraud. So yeah, it does happen. It does take a long time, but the money in between, it amounts to millions. But I think we're going to have to leave it there, but I do want to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can find you. Also, maybe talk about some of your current work that you have at the Smart Contract research forum that you might have going on, or just anything else that you'd like to promote?
Yeah, so I am generally, I guess if you're trying to find me on the internet, it's going to be either on Twitter or on my podcast, Exceptional Randos. That's exceptionalrandos.com. And then obviously the Smart Contract Research Forum is where the research happens. And right now we have started a Pan-African grants program that is finding African academics and giving them resources to do case study summaries, or in some cases, if they've done publications themselves, highlight their own work. So that's kind of where my focus right now is, surfacing research in the blockchain space, because that's one of the biggest gaps that needs to be filled right now. And fortunately, there are people in the space that are willing to pay for research, because that was a problem before where, especially in academia in America, research and knowledge in specialized areas is undervalued intentionally. But because there has been such a rush to the blockchain space, there has been a lot more investment in research, because these organizations understand that having a better understanding of the space will only lead to better results. Like it's only going to be better for everybody if there are objective people doing research on the space, and that's ultimately what SCURF kind of has. It's in our first year still, but I feel like we've definitely grown into a space that has its own culture, and that culture is towards objective, critical discussion of research in the space.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Thanks so
thank
much
you for having me.
taking time out. I mean, you this is 2 hours of your time. It's 2 hours of your weekend. So I really appreciate it. We've talked about so many different things, not just crypto, but I do really think that it will help people who watch this show think about, once again, money differently, about crypto differently, what the value proposition is in all this, and, maybe something that we can get out of it as a community, but also how we can also get something out of it as a humanity. So, thanks again for taking time out to be here and speak with us, Chris. Thanks so much for everybody for taking time out to watch. This has been a long show, but it's been a different type of conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for being on. And with that, I'm going to let you guys go. But be sure to check us out next week for another edition of Black USA Crypto News. Take care.